Chapter 1. Once upon a time, a queen sat at a window sewing. Outside the window, the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the sky. The frame of the window was made of black ebony wood. While she was sewing and looking out the window, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the white cloth. And the red looked pretty upon the white cloth, and she thought to herself, I wish that I could have a child as white as snow, with lips as red as blood, and hair as black as the wood of the window frame. Soon after that, she had a little daughter, who was as white as snow. Her lips were as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony, and she was called Little Snow White. However, when the child was born, the queen died. Chapter 2. After a year had passed, the king took another wife for himself. She was a beautiful woman, but proud and arrogant, and she could not bear anyone else who was more beautiful than she was. She had a magnificent magic mirror. It could answer questions truthfully. When she stood in front of it and looked at herself in it and said, magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest in the world? The magic mirror answered, my queen, you are the fairest woman in the world. Then she was satisfied, for she knew that the magic mirror spoke the truth. But Snow White grew up and became more and more beautiful. When Snow White was 17 years old, she was more beautiful than the queen. One morning, the queen asked the mirror, magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest woman in the world? It answered, O Lady Queen, Snow White is fairer than you. Then the queen was shocked and turned yellow and green with envy. From that moment, whenever she looked at Snow White, her heart pounded in her chest. The queen hated the girl so much, and envy and pride grew higher and higher in her heart like a weed. She had no peace day or night. She called a hunter and said, take the child away into the forest. I will no longer have her here. Kill her and bring me back her heart as a present. The hunter obeyed and took her away. But as he drew his knife and tried to pierce Snow White's innocent heart, she began to weep and said, ah, dear hunter, let me have my life. I will run away into the wild forest and never come home again. Because she was so beautiful, the hunter felt sorry for her and said, run away, poor child. But he thought, the wild beasts will eat her soon. Yet his heart felt peace, since he did not need to kill her. Just then a little bear came running up to him, and he stabbed it. He cut out its heart and took it to the queen to show that Snow White was dead. Chapter 3. Now the poor child was all alone in the dark forest. She looked at all the leaves on the trees, and she did not know what to do. Then she began to run, and she ran for as long as she could, until it was almost evening. Night came, and Snow White began to cry loudly. She thought she felt terrible eyes spying on her, and she heard strange sounds that made her heart thump. At last, overcome by tiredness, she fell asleep curled under a tree. Finally, dawn came, and the song of the birds came to the forest. Snow White also woke up. The whole world was coming to life. She was happy to realize that she did not need to be afraid. However, the thick trees were like a wall around her. And as she tried to find out where she was, she came upon a path. She walked along and she felt hope. She walked until she came to a clearing. There stood a strange cottage with a tiny door, tiny windows, and a tiny chimney. Everything about the cottage was much smaller than a normal house. Snow White pushed the door open. Everything in the cottage was small, but the cottage was neat and clean. There was a white cloth on the table, 7 little plates, 7 little spoons, 7 little knives, 7 little forks, and 7 little cups were on the table. There were 7 little beds side by side against the wall. They were covered with blankets that were white like snow. Chapter 4. Snow White was so hungry and thirsty that she ate some vegetables and bread from each plate and drank a drop of juice out of each cup. She did not want to eat and drink everything from one plate or cup. Then, because she was so tired, she laid herself down on one of the little beds. None of them were the right size for her. One bed was too long, and another bed was too short. At last, Snow White found out that the 7th one was just right. She rested on that bed. She said a prayer and went to sleep. When it was quite dark, the owners of the cottage came back. They were 7 dwarves who dug deep in the mountains for metal. They lit 7 candles. The light was bright inside the cottage. They saw that someone had been there because everything was not in the same place where they left it. The first dwarf said, "Who has been sitting on my chair?" The second dwarf said, "Who has been eating off my plate?" The third dwarf said, "Who has been eating some of my bread?" The fourth dwarf said, "Who has been eating my vegetables?" The fifth dwarf said, "Who has been using my fork?" The sixth dwarf said, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The 7th dwarf said, "Who has been drinking out of my cup?" Then the first dwarf looked around and saw that something was different about his bed. "Someone was sleeping in my bed." The other dwarfs came over and each of them said, "Someone was lying in my bed too." But when the 7th dwarf looked at his bed, he saw little Snow White sleeping there. He called the others who came running up, and they cried out with shock. They brought their 7 little candles and let the light shine on little Snow White. Oh heavens, what a lovely young lady. They were so glad they did not wake her up, and they let her keep sleeping in the bed. The 7th dwarf rested with his friends in their beds. He slept for 1 hour in each bed with his friends. The next morning, the dwarfs asked the little girl, "Who are you?" Snow White told them her sad story. Tears came to their eyes. Then one of the dwarfs said, Stay here with us," as he blew his nose. "Hooray! Hooray!" They cheered, dancing joyfully around the little girl. The dwarfs said to Snow White, "You can live here and take care of the housework while we work in the mine. Don't worry about the queen leaving you in the forest. We love you and we will take care of you." Snow White was grateful. She accepted their hospitality, and the next morning the dwarfs went off to work. They told Snow White not to open the door for people she did not know. Chapter 5. Meanwhile, the hunter had returned to the castle with the heart of the little bear. He gave it to the cruel queen. He told her it belonged to Snow White, so that he could claim the reward. The queen turned to the magic mirror, very pleased. But her hopes were crushed. The mirror said to her, "The loveliest woman in the land is still Snow White, who lives with the 7 dwarves in the forest." The queen was beside herself with anger. "She must die, she must die," she screamed. The queen disguised herself as an old peasant woman. She put a poisoned apple with other apples into a basket. Then she took the quickest way into the forest. She crossed the swamp at the edge of the trees. She came to the edge of the swamp and no one saw her. At this moment, Snow White was waving goodbye to the dwarfs on their way to the mine. Snow White was in the kitchen when she heard a sound at the door. "Knock, knock." "Who's there?" she said. She remembered the dwarf's advice. "I'm an old peasant woman selling apples," the voice replied. "I don't need any apples, thank you," Snow White replied. "But they are beautiful apples, and they are so juicy," said the smooth voice from outside the door. "I shouldn't open the door for anyone," said Snow White. She did not want to disobey her friends. "You're right, you're such a good girl. If you promised not to open the door for strangers, then you can't buy anything. Yes, you're a good girl." Then the old woman continued, "As a reward for being good, I'm going to give you one of my apples as a gift." Snow White did not think about it. She opened the door just a tiny crack to take the apple. "There, isn't that a nice apple?" Snow White bit into the fruit, and as she did, she fell to the ground. The terrible poison killed her right away. The evil queen laughed and hurried away, but when she ran back across the swamp, she tripped and fell into some quicksand. No one heard her cries for help. She disappeared and no one could find her. Chapter 6. Meanwhile, the dwarfs came out of the mine. They saw that the sky was dark and stormy. Thunder echoed through the valleys, and streaks of lightning ripped through the sky. They were worried about Snow White, and they ran down the mountain as quickly as they could. They arrived at the cottage. At the cottage, they found Snow White. She was lying there dead with the poisoned apple by her side. They tried their best to bring her to life, but it was no use. They wept and wept for a long time. Then they laid her on a bed of petals. They carried her into the forest and put her in a glass coffin. They laid a flower there each day. One evening, they discovered a young man looking at Snow White's beautiful face through the glass. This man was a prince. After he heard her story, he made a suggestion. If you allow me to take her to my castle, I will bring in famous doctors. They will wake her up from this unusual sleep. The prince saw her again and he said, "She's so lovely. I wish I could kiss her." He did. Something magical happened. The prince's kiss broke the spell. Everyone was amazed. Snow White opened her eyes. She came back to life. The prince was in love. He asked Snow White to marry him. The dwarfs were sad to say goodbye to Snow White. Snow White lived happily life in the great castle. But she always remembered the little cottage in the forest. She went back to visit her friends there whenever she could.